It wasn't supposed to happen this way. The courtroom in downtown Atlanta buzzed with whispers, marble pillars catching morning light as cameras clicked like gunshots. A billionaire tech mogul sat at the defense table, silent, fuming, abandoned. No attorney, no explanation. Just an empty chair where the country's most expensive legal shark should have been. And then, a voice rose. "I will defend him." Every head turned. The gallery froze. A young black woman stood near the back. No suit, no briefcase. Just a simple navy apron still tied at her waist, her cheeks shining with nervous sweat, and a worn manila folder clutched to her chest like a shield. People laughed. Someone muttered, "Is she delivering lunch?" Another whispered, "What's next?" The janitor presenting closing arguments. But Naomi Carter didn't blink. She walked forward, her steps steady, her spine straight, her voice clear as glass. "Your Honor, my name is Naomi Carter. I request temporary standing to represent Mr. Raymond Thorne in this hearing." The judge squinted. "Are you an attorney, Ms. Carter?" "No, sir," she replied. "I studied law at Howard University. Left in my 3rd year. My mother had a stroke. I had to work." Raymond Thorne, worth $3.8 billion, looked her over with a frown. "You clean my house," he snapped. Naomi nodded once. "Yes, and I've read every contract in your case. Every page. Every footnote. I know what's coming for you. And I'm the only one who stayed." Silence. The judge hesitated. "If Mr. Thorne agrees, I will allow it. For now." Naomi turned to him. "You can mock me, or you can survive this. But you can't do both." He stared. Then slowly he nodded. The courtroom erupted. Cameras clicked again. But this time, they weren't capturing scandal. They were witnessing something far rarer. A fight for justice, started not in a law school, not in a boardroom, but in the quiet courage of a woman who refused to stay silent. Naomi Carter wasn't always the woman standing in a courtroom. Long before her name echoed through headlines, she was just a girl from West Baltimore, raised in a one-bedroom apartment by a mother who worked double shifts at a nursing home. Life didn't give her many choices. It gave her grit. It gave her resilience. It gave her a front-row seat to struggle. She made it to Howard University. Full ride. Law major. Top of her class. Professors said she had the kind of mind that could make senators nervous. But brilliance doesn't pay hospital bills. When her mother had a stroke in Naomi's 3rd year, everything changed. The scholarships covered tuition, not medical costs. Her younger brother was still in high school. Rent was due. Her mother needed round-the-clock care. So Naomi left law school, traded textbooks for time cards, and stepped into the workforce like so many black women before her. Unseen, underpaid, and underestimated. She found work through a domestic staffing agency and ended up at Raymond Thorne's estate in Buckhead, Georgia. 5 bedrooms. 7 bathrooms. Marble floors she polished until they gleamed. A security code for every door, but not a single person who ever asked her name. But while the world saw an apron and gloves, Naomi never stopped seeing the law. Late at night, while others slept, she read court transcripts by flashlight in her shared apartment. She downloaded podcasts by legal scholars during morning commutes. She watched federal hearings online during lunch breaks, scribbling notes on napkins between bites of cold chicken salad. And when Raymond's legal team started leaving case files out, scattered, unattended, she started reading those too. Quietly. Methodically. She wasn't spying. She was preparing. Because something inside her whispered, "You'll need this one day." They thought she was invisible. But Naomi Carter was paying attention. And when the moment came, when the system she once studied turned into the battlefield she had to cross, she didn't flinch. Because she'd already fought harder wars in silence. And now, the silence was over. The courtroom wasn't ready for Naomi Carter. The moment she spoke, "I will defend him," a ripple went through the air like a stone tossed into still water. Gasps. Whispers. Some muffled laughter. The judge, an older man with deep lines on his face and decades of legal tradition behind him, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter. What did you say?" Naomi didn't repeat herself. She stepped forward. one foot in front of the other. Her shoes still carried the scent of floor polish. Her apron was spotted with dust from the morning's cleaning. But her eyes, they didn't flinch. "My name is Naomi Carter," she said. "I worked in Mr. Thorne's household for the past 2 years. I'm not licensed, but I've studied every page of his case, every filing, every statute used against him. I believe I'm more familiar with this file than anyone in this room." From the prosecution table, Eleanor Crane narrowed her eyes. A seasoned legal bulldog with a national reputation, she stood slowly, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dipped in condescension, "this is a courtroom, not a reality show. Allowing a housemaid to represent a federal defendant is not just unorthodox, it's an insult to this institution." The judge didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to Raymond Thorne, who sat rigid in his chair, eyes wide. "Mr. Thorne, do you consent to this arrangement?" Raymond's gaze flicked between the judge and Naomi. Then, with a breath that sounded more like a groan, he muttered, "Fine. Let her do whatever she wants." The judge raised a brow. "Very well. Miss Carter, I will allow you to speak, for today's hearing only, under observation." The courtroom stirred again. Phones went up. Reporters scribbled. Someone in the back whispered, "She's gonna crash and burn." Naomi moved to the defense table, gently laid her folder down, and opened it with care. Inside were handwritten notes, printed court rulings, cross-referenced articles, all color-coded by statute. Eleanor scoffed. "What are you going to do? Highlight your way out of federal prison?" Naomi looked up calm. "I brought facts. And receipts." Silence. And then, for the first time, the courtroom leaned in. Not to laugh, not to mock, but to listen. Because something had shifted. Naomi Carter wasn't just standing. She was holding the floor. Naomi Carter didn't waste time. She stood at the defense table, took a breath, and held up a single document. An altered joint venture agreement that sat at the heart of the prosecution's fraud claims. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is the contract they say Mr. Thorne manipulated to deceive investors." She walked toward the bench with purpose, holding it up for the judge. "But if you examine the metadata embedded in this document, something the prosecution failed to mention, you'll find it was modified on February 9th, 3:14 a.m. Eastern Time, from an IP address registered in Luxembourg." The courtroom froze. Even Eleanor Crane paused, one perfectly arched brow twitching. Naomi continued, flipping to a second printed page. "Now compare that to the original version of the agreement, filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission 2 weeks prior. The clause in question, the one supposedly added to inflate earnings, doesn't exist in the SEC version." She handed both documents to the bailiff. The judge examined them, lips pursed. "And there's more," Naomi said, returning to the center of the room. "The phrasing in the forged version uses European contract language, terms like successive guarantee clause and non-termination indemnity, phrases that don't appear in any of Mr. Thorne's prior agreements, which follow standard U.S. corporate syntax." She clicked a small remote, and behind her, a screen lit up with side-by-side comparisons. "Color-coded. Annotated." "I know," Naomi said calmly, "because I've spent the last year reading over 300 corporate contracts, between floor-scrubbing shifts and after my little brother's bedtime. I memorized this language. I know what doesn't belong." Eleanor shot to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. She's not certified, she can't." The judge lifted a hand. "She's presenting documented material. I'll allow it." Naomi turned back to the room. "They want you to believe Mr. Thorne altered this contract to get rich," she said. "But he didn't write this version. He didn't upload it. And if you look closely, he didn't even sign it." She pointed to a time-stamped signature box. No digital certificate. No match to his usual encryption key. Someone else forged this. Gasps rippled. And just like that, the story had changed. Naomi hadn't just cracked the case. She'd cracked it open. The forged contract hadn't appeared out of nowhere. And Naomi Carter knew that if she was going to win this case, really win it, she had to find the person who had planted it. His name was Kyle Bishop, Raymond's former executive assistant. The man who once scheduled his meetings, prepped his documents, even handled his digital signature keys. He left the company 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Quiet, clean, no goodbyes, no forwarding address. But Naomi had noticed something. In the signature logs from the forged contract, there was a digital footprint, a routing string tied to a device ID she had seen before. It matched an old email header from Kyle's company laptop. That's what sent her into the city. She took the train to Midtown, to a shared office space where Kyle once rented a desk on the 12th floor of a glass-paneled co-working hub. The receptionist was new, barely looked up when Naomi asked about him. He left last month, the woman said, chewing gum. Didn't even clear out his locker. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Is it still there? A shrug. I mean, we don't touch stuff unless it smells. Naomi found the locker at the back of the break room. It wasn't locked. Inside were 2 empty folders, an old charger, and a coffee-stained notebook. But what caught her eye, wedged behind a stack of promotional flyers, was a small USB drive taped to the wall. She took it, pocketed it, heart pounding. Back in her apartment that night, she plugged it into her laptop and scanned the contents. Most of it was junk, schedules, archived newsletters, half-finished grocery lists. But buried deep in a subfolder marked Client Docs, she found something that stopped her cold. 3 versions of the joint venture contract. Version 1, original, SEC file. Version 2, modified with European clause structure. Version 3, identical to the one presented in court, complete with a Luxembourg IP tag. Each version included time-stamped edits, all made from the same device, Kyle's. And the most recent modification? 2 days before the lawsuit was filed. Naomi stared at the screen. Kyle hadn't just disappeared. He had erased himself. But not well enough. She made a copy of the drive, encrypted it, backed it up twice, then slid the original into a hollowed-out dictionary on her bookshelf. Tomorrow, she thought, the court gets a new story. A real one. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the Thorne estate earlier than usual. She wasn't there to clean. Raymond hadn't asked to see her. In fact, he hadn't spoken to her directly since the courtroom allowed her to stand beside him. But that didn't matter. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He was in his home office, seated behind a massive oak desk, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. A glass of scotch sat untouched beside his laptop. He looked up, surprised, as she walked in with the same navy cardigan and jeans she wore every day. I didn't call for you, he said, voice sharp. You also didn't ask anyone to save your neck in court, she replied. But here we are. He exhaled, leaned back. What do you want? Naomi stepped forward and placed the USB drive on his desk like it was a loaded weapon. I found Kyle, she said. Not him exactly, but his fingerprints. Digital ones. Raymond didn't touch the drive. He just stared at it. She continued, voice calm but firm. 3 versions of your contract. One of them, the one used to accuse you, was created from his old device. I matched the metadata. He didn't cover his tracks as well as he thought. Raymond rubbed his eyes. So, he set me up? He set up the company, Naomi corrected. You were just the perfect fall guy. Too rich, too busy, too arrogant to notice the small print. They counted on that. He looked at her then. Not past her, not through her, her. And you? He asked quietly. What are you counting on? I'm counting on truth, Naomi said. Because whether or not you like it, I'm the only one in your orbit right now not trying to burn you down. Silence settled between them. Raymond finally picked up the USB. You could have walked away. I did once, Naomi said. When my mom needed me. I won't walk away from this. He nodded slowly, the lines around his eyes deeper than the day before. All right. You've got my attention. She met his gaze. Good. Because if we don't act now, they'll rewrite the ending before we even finish the middle. And with that, the cleaning lady who wasn't supposed to matter became the strategist no one saw coming. That afternoon, Naomi followed a hunch. She'd been reviewing Raymond's logistics reports. Nothing fancy, just invoices and delivery logs from the past 6 months. Buried in the paper trail was a line item for a private courier service. high-end, secure, destination, a vault unit in Sandy Springs, Georgia. It wasn't something Raymond remembered ordering. But Naomi had learned something about powerful men. They don't always read what they sign. She made her way to the vault facility. The receptionist looked skeptical, but Naomi was calm, confident. She presented the delivery record and signed in as executive assistant, acting under urgent legal authorization. The woman at the desk shrugged and handed her a brass key. Locker 312. It opened with a hollow click. Inside, there was one item, a sealed manila envelope wrapped in plastic and marked confidential, client copy. Naomi took it. Back at her apartment, she peeled it open like it might bite. Inside were three things: a flash drive, a printed memo, and a bound report stamped with the Altair Holdings logo. Her fingers shook, but she kept going. The memo was addressed to Altair's executive board, dated 2 months before the lawsuit. It outlined tactical pressure strategies for acquiring undervalued assets through legal restructuring. The language was cold, surgical. It referred to Raymond's company as a viable extraction target and recommended inserting soft edits into shared contracts, just enough to trigger regulatory violations. But it was the bound report that chilled her blood. It contained side-by-side versions of the very contract used in court. Version A, the clean one. Version B, the altered one, with notes in the margin written in shorthand Naomi had seen before. Kyle's. One note read, "Push this clause before Q1 filing. If he resists, file under misrepresentation." They hadn't just sabotaged the contract. They'd timed it, framed it, weaponized it. She loaded the flash drive onto her laptop. It contained internal emails between Kyle and a legal advisor from Altair, talking strategy, creating timelines, using corporate jargon like litigation as leverage. This wasn't incompetence. It was premeditated fraud. Naomi backed up every file. Twice. One copy went into her freezer, inside an old frozen pea bag, just like she'd seen in whistleblower documentaries. She sat back, heart thudding. This could blow the case wide open. And in the morning, it would. The first sign came as she crossed the street. Naomi had just stepped off the bus near her apartment in South Atlanta, the folder of copied documents tucked tightly under her arm. She'd walked this route for months. Same cracked sidewalk, same flickering streetlight near the corner bodega. But tonight, something felt off. A black sedan idled at the curb, engine running, headlights dimmed. As she passed, the driver didn't move, didn't look away, just watched her, stone still, through tinted glass. She kept walking, didn't speed up, didn't show fear, but her heart was racing. She reached her building, climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, and locked the door behind her, twice. She dropped her bag and was halfway to the kitchen when she saw it. A white envelope, slipped under the door. No return address. No markings. Just a single sheet of paper inside. Printed. Plain. Cold. Walk away or disappear. That was it. No signature. No logo. No bluff. Naomi's fingers clenched around the letter. Her breathing shallow. She wasn't naive. She'd watched enough people get burned for chasing the truth. Whistleblowers forced into hiding. Journalists silenced with lawsuits or worse. This was a warning. But it was also confirmation. She was close. She stepped into her bedroom, pulled the shades, and reached for the hollowed-out book on her shelf. She double-checked every backup file, then added 2 more encrypted copies, one on a flash drive hidden in her coat lining, the other buried in a jar of rice behind the flour tin, just in case. Then she took out her phone and made a call. "Reggie," she said, voice low, "I need a favor." He was a former classmate, now working with a small investigative outlet, the kind that didn't scare easy. "I think someone's watching me," she said, "and I need eyes on me, quiet ones." He didn't ask questions, just said, "I'll send someone to keep a look from the corner." Naomi hung up and leaned against the door. The letter still trembled in her hand. They were scared, and scared people make mistakes. She wouldn't run. Not now. Let them watch. Because tomorrow, the truth would speak louder than fear ever could. Court resumed the next morning under a different kind of tension. Gone was the smug energy of the prosecution. Gone were the whispers, the laughter, the sideways glances at the maid in the courtroom. Naomi Carter entered quietly, binder in hand, hair pulled back, jaw set. Her eyes didn't scan the gallery. She was focused, calculated. She had come to deliver a blow. The judge adjusted his glasses as the room settled. "We'll begin with new evidence. Miss Carter, you may proceed." Naomi stood, calm and measured. "Your Honor, I submit Exhibit G, a memo recovered from a secure vault in Sandy Springs, authored by executives at Altair Holdings. It outlines a coordinated effort to alter legal documents for strategic acquisition of Thorne Enterprises." She handed the document to the bailiff. "But more importantly," she continued, "Exhibit H." She lifted a flash drive into view, then passed it to the technician. The contents of this drive include internal communications between Kyle Bishop, Mr. Thorne's former assistant, and senior legal counsel at Altair. These emails confirm that contract modifications were made off-site, with the intent to mislead regulators and shareholders. The screen behind her lit up. Email after email appeared, subject lines like, "Push through before Q1," and "He won't catch this in time." The room went still. One email, timestamped just 2 days before the lawsuit filing, read, "Once this version is filed, we initiate litigation. Public pressure will drive the stock down. Acquisition terms get favorable from there." Gasps echoed. Eleanor Crane stood, visibly shaken. "Your Honor, we object. This material has not been verified through independent." Naomi raised a hand. "Exhibit I, Your Honor. A signed affidavit from a third-party digital forensics firm confirming the chain of custody, metadata integrity, and IP log verification." The judge skimmed the document. His jaw tightened. "This is serious," he muttered. Then louder, "Miss Crane, do you wish to rebut?" She didn't respond. Naomi stepped forward. "This isn't just about fraud," she said. "It's about the system's willingness to silence the truth when it comes wrapped in an apron instead of a briefcase." She paused. "They didn't just forge a contract. They forged a narrative. And now it's unraveling." The judge sat back slowly. "We'll recess for review. But I suspect this hearing just became something far bigger." Naomi returned to her seat. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. She'd simply let the truth speak for itself. And for the first time it was being heard. By the time Naomi left the courthouse, the headlines had already started. "The maid who outlawyered Wall Street." From Mop to Mike, Naomi Carter takes on big law. Cleaning lady exposes $70 million corporate fraud. Social media exploded. Clips of Naomi's courtroom delivery went viral. Her calm voice dismantling a billion-dollar scheme with nothing more than a binder, a flash drive, and unshakable resolve. Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag Naomi the Defender. Hashtag Truth in an Apron. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Camera crews stood on her sidewalk. Every network wanted an interview. Every law firm wanted a quote. Naomi declined them all. Instead, she issued one statement, through a handwritten letter, posted to a small legal justice nonprofit's website. It read, "I didn't set out to make headlines. I set out to make a difference. Justice should never depend on your income, your education, or the clothes you wear. It should depend on the truth. And the truth deserves a voice, even if it has to speak through a maid's uniform." The response was immediate. Law students across the country cited her during lectures. Civil rights groups reached out with invitations. Journalists dug deeper into Altair's history, uncovering more patterns of predatory behavior. But perhaps most powerfully, everyday people began to share their own stories. Janitors, line cooks, nursing assistants, women like Naomi, men like her late father, all of them saying, "I see myself in her." Naomi Carter had become more than a courtroom oddity. She'd become a symbol of defiance against a system that dismisses the working class as uninformed, invisible, disposable. And while she never asked for fame, she understood its power. Because if the world was going to listen to her now, she wasn't about to whisper. She'd use that spotlight, not to elevate herself, but to illuminate every person who ever believed their truth didn't matter. And this time they'd all be heard. 1 year later, the courtroom was quieter. No cameras. No flashing headlines. No suits worth more than a used car lining the gallery. This wasn't a high-profile case. It was something better. A community hearing inside a repurposed YMCA gym in East Atlanta. The folding chairs were mismatched. The walls were bare. But the room was full. Janitors, waitresses, bus drivers, day laborers. People who had worked their whole lives and still didn't know how to read a lease agreement, let alone defend one in court. And at the front, standing behind a lectern made from reclaimed wood, was Naomi Carter. She wore jeans and a simple gray sweater. No robe. No badge. Just the same quiet strength that once silenced a courtroom filled with billionaires. The sign above her read, "The People's Defense Network. Free legal support. No suits required." She looked out over the room and began. "Most of you know my name because of what happened in court last year. But this," she waved a hand around the space, "this is what matters now." She paused. "The truth is, justice shouldn't be exclusive. It shouldn't be a language only a few can speak. So we started this network for the people who've been left out of the conversation for too long." The audience was quiet, but leaning in. Naomi continued. "In 1 year, we've opened 3 satellite offices across Georgia. We've translated legal documents into Spanish, Vietnamese, and Haitian Creole. We've trained 28 community advocates who now walk into courtrooms not as victims, but as voices." Applause. Steady. Honest. She smiled but didn't bask in it. "We don't wear capes. We wear aprons, tool belts, name tags. But we stand for each other. That's what justice really looks like." At the back of the room, Raymond Thorne watched in silence. He no longer wore custom suits. His company was smaller now, but cleaner, stronger. He had donated the seed money for the project, but insisted on no credit. Naomi never mentioned him, not out of disrespect, but because she had outgrown that chapter. She wasn't someone's assistant anymore. She was a founder, a leader, and for every person sitting in that room, she had become something even rarer. Hope made real. Naomi Carter stood alone at her kitchen table. Same table, same apartment, but everything had changed. The binder that once held secrets powerful enough to bring down a billion-dollar company now held something else. Thank you notes. Dozens of them. From people she'd never met, people she'd never hear from again. Tenants who kept their homes. Whistleblowers who stayed safe. Mothers who finally understood how to read the fine print. She ran her hand over the worn folder and exhaled. Justice, she realized, wasn't a verdict. It was a commitment. A choice you make every day. To pay attention, to speak up, to stand firm even when your knees shake. It didn't require permission. It didn't wait for credentials. It began wherever someone decided, enough is enough. She turned to the window. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Horns blaring, buses groaning, someone arguing on a corner about the Falcons. And yet, it all felt quieter now. Not because the fight was over, but because Naomi had learned how to fight smarter. She sat down, opened her laptop, and began typing a new proposal, legislation to protect community advocates from legal retaliation. Her name wasn't on the draft. She didn't need it to be, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about momentum. At the bottom of the page, she typed one line. Justice is not a luxury. It's a right. And sometimes, all it takes to protect that right is the courage to speak before anyone gives you the mic. She hit save, then closed the laptop. Naomi poured herself a cup of tea, leaned back in her chair, and smiled. Not because the war was won, but because, somewhere out there, a woman was staring at a locked courtroom door. And maybe, just maybe, she'd remember Naomi Carter. Not the maid, not the lawyer, but the woman who dared to speak when no one else would. And who proved you don't need a title to tell the truth. You just need to begin.